Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa Jones,
And I'm Peter Matson.
and this is the Beyond Data podcast. And joining us today is Joel Hodgson, where we're going to be talking about the balance between human and machine applications as it applies to data science. Thank you for joining us today, Joel.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and how you got here?
Yeah, sure. Not sure how I ended up here, but
Yeah.
to tell you a bit more about myself. I've been in the sort of MLOps and machine learning industry for about the past 5 or 6 years or so. I was previously at another MLOps-based startup in London, where we focused around the deployment of machine learning models, so helping data science teams get the models from development and into production. Essentially when I was there, I noticed this big challenge with lots of the companies I was working with, where they really struggled to understand how their end users were engaging with the models and if they're actually useful and actually using them or not. Decided to take a punt at starting my own business and venture, and started a company called Trubrics with my co-founder Jeff. Where we're focused on essentially building this platform for user insights for AI models, and trying to tackle this problem. Looking forward to having a chat today.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's why I was really excited too, because I feel like in this current atmosphere of AI and ML, there's so much focus on automation. And I know that we've been very passionate about this problem of proper balance between human input and the development, maintenance, so forth of machine learning models. So when I stumbled upon your company and we started talking, it seemed like just a really great conversation to crack open, because I think that this is going to become more commonplace. Like, we've gotten great at automating a bunch of stuff. Now we need to figure out how to make it deeply useful. I'm really excited to kind of open it up. So I think there's a lot of failure points that we could kind of orbit around in this sense, because there's a lot of different ways in which without the human input, it just doesn't work. And I'd be curious to kind of hear how you came to this moment of like understanding this problem. And what some of the main failure points you observed were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think perhaps one of the first key things which first actually got me thinking about this problem and sort of area as a whole was really just around this challenge of adoption. And we were working with various different clients across different industries as well. So it wasn't really like it was focused on just financial services or just pharmaceutical or something. It was across all of these various different projects. And these data science teams were having this challenge where they were spending months or years to actually build out these models and then finally send them out into the wild, having them deployed somewhere. And then just the wider business teams just wouldn't use them. And there was just no understanding on why they weren't very engaged. And of course, then it just massively impacts all of that investment they've put into the development itself. I think one of the really big reasons that tie into this lack of adoption is massively around trust and maybe lack of understanding from other internal business teams or end users. Of course, if they're not tech savvy and not many people know the language of data science and machine learning, and when they're given this new tool, which they may even find threatening if it's almost automating part of their job, they're going to be very reluctant to start engaging with it and actually using it on a day-to-day, let alone be happy enough to then, I guess, provide any insights back to the data science teams to try and improve that and enhance the experience itself.
So you brought up a really interesting point there, which is like some people are hesitant to adopt machine learning models because they fear the automation of their jobs, right? And like the job security that comes along with that. I've definitely seen that in my experience with building models. Like,
Yeah.
In previous work, right? I've had some models with where we've worked very closely. We've got good feedback, and people adopted them. They used them, and it was great. And we've had times where it's like, hey, we're trying to help you do your job better, and we're trying to make that easier for you, but you're afraid that this is gonna take over your job. So, like, I guess can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, how do you
Yeah.
address that? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a difficult challenge. I think ultimately a lot of that comes down to education. There is also, I guess, the point of honesty as well around why the business is implementing AI and machine learning, and the need to be completely transparent. And of course, ideally, in an ideal world, we're building AI and machine learning to enhance people's lives and enable their jobs and help them do their jobs better, by either automating the mundane day-to-day activities so they can focus on something else, or providing them better insights to actually achieve whatever they're trying to do in a better way. So ultimately, it really comes down to an education point of view and being transparent as a business. There is, of course, potentially cases where companies are just trying to automate certain roles, and that's then understandable why people are then reluctant. So there's maybe an ethical point in there as well that comes down to why we're implementing AI, and are we implementing AI or machine learning for the right reasons.
Yeah, there's another element that I notice a lot with adoption. I mean, I've certainly experienced the automation threat as well, but another one that I see really frequently is like, businesses are complex, and people who are making business decisions, they know intuitively in their gut that they're sorting through a bunch of things that they just inherently know about the data, and they don't have confidence that that knowledge is being integrated into the model development process. And then I think on the other side, you have data scientists who may or may not be including that understanding, but the communication can be very difficult if you have a highly technical person who's talking in a statistical sort of vernacular, and then trying to convert that into a question where the business person can feel like they're part of the development process, because ultimately they need to be, because these models are going to not be very valuable if the business understanding behind the data isn't actually integrated into the model development, right?
Yeah, massively. This is another big topic we've looked at before, and trying to actually, I guess, understand the domain knowledge behind the use case to integrate that back into the use case. Because as you mentioned, there's just a complete difference in technical language across the different personas within the team. The data scientists, of course, very knowledgeable in the data science domain, and say if you're doing a drug discovery use case, there's all of this chemist knowledge which needs to be extracted from the chemist to build back into the model itself. One key way that we've tried to tackle that in the past, and the key thing that we're focusing on, is almost getting just early MVPs and early iterations of a model out as quick as possible, so that the domain expert's able to actually interact with that model and start to pull it apart and realize, okay, well, if I do these tricky edge cases, which I know I'm going to trick this model on, the model falls over. And that's the best way to then actually understand what those edge cases are, so then the data scientists can then implement them back in. Because unlike most projects, it's really hard to scope some of these requirements up front. It'll be, in an ideal world, you'll know every edge case and every piece of behavior you want to build into your model, but until you actually put something in front of your user, that's when they actually give you some insights, because also they don't know what's useful for you and what's not. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I remember in my really ambitious days, I used to think I could write out all the edge cases, and there are very few situations where that's true, but I've never succeeded.
So I guess within that process, right, where you're creating these feedback loops where people can look at the model results, and you have this kind of structured feedback that they're giving back to the data scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, kind of the basis of trust that's getting built there. Like, I guess in that process, there's, some translation that needs to happen between what is the model doing, what is the feedback on that model, and how does that get interpreted both by the end user and the data scientist there. Like, what does that process kind of look like? How do you build out those feedback loops? And
so for us, what we're currently doing is we're essentially providing this solution to collect feedback from any AI or machine learning based application, and then provide a platform to then actually be able to analyze and dig into that feedback a bit further. So what that sort of means. So currently, when we speak to many different businesses, nobody really has any processes in place to collect this feedback. So maybe people send emails, they fill in Excel sheets, send Slack messages. The issue with that, first of all, is all of this feedback is uncentralized and very unmanageable at scale. You also can't see it from the higher level point of view. You have to see every piece of feedback from a point of feedback level. But also you lose all of the metadata around the feedback as well. So if you emailed me, for example, saying, hey, Joel, the model's not working as I think it should be. I've got no idea what model you're using, what data set you're using the model with, or what your prediction was, or the response, or anything. And so, the first step is just having a process in place to actually collect this feedback along with all of the metadata and information around the model. That way we can then start breaking feedback points down by model version, or model A versus model B, maybe break down by user as well, to see if there's a particular user that has a lot more negative feedback than others. In that case, it might not be the model's problem, it might be the user problem, and you need to do some education there. So the first step is really just having this process in place to collect and manage the feedback. And then, I'm sure in future there can be lots more advanced sorts of analytics going in there to try and extract insights and identify what's valuable and what's not, or maybe even perhaps recommending like next best course of action and that sort of thing. Step one is getting people off email and Slack.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, email and Slack is actually more advanced than what my first machine learning projects used. And we would print out, like, we'd run our model, we'd get the output of it, and we'd print that out. It was a ranked list of products to add to a platform. And we'd bring that over to our product analysts, and they would pass it around the team, and they would highlight or write feedback on it, and then hand that back to us. And we'd be like, okay, let's see, we got 10 out of these 25 are our top products. Let's
But interestingly, that was like your way of getting engagement. I mean, it sounds like at least they were engaging.
Right. Yeah. And those, that was definitely some of the good examples of when we had good feedback and people were, engaging in the product, rather than, when some of the fear kind of entered in later on. It was like, okay, we give you this list, and they'd be like, we'll get to that next week.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and what's interesting too is there's almost a distinction between the build phase and then the monitor phase, kind of. But interestingly, in my experience, it's like the process of the build phase is all about what are we doing here, what's our objective. And then during the monitor phase, when someone comes up with an edge case that broke it, or that didn't quite work the way you wanted it to, it's almost like you go back, right, to that fundamental way of, okay, let's collaborate together on how we handle this, which I feel like is such a great, rich opportunity, because I do feel like there's a little bit of a misconception out there that ML models are something that you just build and then they're done. you've done your work. Which is just not at all how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's different ways as well around, or maybe different types of feedback that you want to get at the different phases too. Maybe when you're in development, you can be pulling out a lot more of those initial domain sort of insights and getting some of that feedback from some of the experts which you're a bit closer with to help you build the model. You can also do a lot more almost like controlled feedback to help with retraining to help iterate the model. There's obviously with the LLM space, all of the reinforcement learning with human feedback. And that's something which you can focus on in development in a very controlled environment and controlled manner. And then, once things are then live in production, we're focusing on this concept around, it's like machine learning monitoring, but from the user's point of view, not from some machine learning metrics point of view. Because your drift detector might be outlining that there's some various drift going on in some sort of feature or output of the model, but really is that impacting the user's point of view and the user's experience. Also as well, the user may be picking up certain issues and errors which some of your monitoring tools might not be, because ultimately I guess what we care about is the model useful for the user? Is it providing value to the user? And if they're happy, then hopefully yes. And if not, then we can look at it.
Yeah. And that reminds me of this, and it's so interesting because a lot of what you're talking about is like transcending that bridge between technical and business acumen. And as part of that, I feel like a lot of people have adopted this, as long as it's highly accurate, then it must be useful. But there are a lot of other things that establish whether a model is useful. Like, does it generalize well? And if it doesn't generalize well, they're going to see it on the back end right away in ways that, and the data scientists may not even know how to look at it. And so I think that's key, but it can be, there's a way in which those things can be traced back to specific things the data scientists can look at. How well distributed is your output? Are you super accurate with really bad distribution of output? Like, that's a flag. It could be a technical flag that then shows up downstream in the business purview. But so do you think that, I have opinions about this, but do you think that there's going to be, and I probably already exposed my bias here, but a transition from like hyper focus on accuracy to different, more creative ways of evaluating models, even above it? We can talk about the financial part of it as well, but above and beyond that, do you think that we're going to be moving more towards that in general?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe looking at putting the sort of financial ROI to one side first. I think this goes back to the point I was saying around, okay, does the user actually use this model output to make a decision? Because it doesn't matter how accurate the model is. Say if you're doing a supply chain forecasting or demand forecasting use case, and this model's outputting how much stock a business person needs to buy for the next 12 months. Does the user actually then take what the model is telling them to do to make that decision or not? Or are they just looking at that and thinking, okay, I'll take that with a pinch of salt and need to go and do something else myself? And I think a lot of that then comes down to, again, this sort of piece around sort of trust or understanding around the model. There's obviously a lot of work happening around explainability too. I think one of the slight issues I have sometimes with explainability is it translates this data science machine learning thing into another data science machine learning thing. So it doesn't actually explain to the person in layman terms what's going on. If you start putting anchors or counterfactuals in front of a business user, they struggle with accuracy, precision recall. So there's no chance that's going to actually help them explain anything. So I think.
Right. Well, and even with that example, like that's like so important to understand. Well, do you want your model to be aggressive or conservative? Like, and based on what metric? Like, anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but
No, just to finish that point. So I guess, if we can understand, like the feedback points I was talking about, it doesn't necessarily have to be this is correct or this is too high, this is too low. It could be I've no understanding how this model is giving me this prediction, or I don't know what this means. And so it can then help you identify what's wrong from the user's point of view to then actually help with that sort of user satisfaction and improve the actual user experience of these products.
Yeah, I have an anecdotal fun example of kind of this from a long time ago. So I was this was in the semiconductor industry, and we were building these logistic models there was a series of models. Anyway, long story short, one of the models was basically like demand modeling, like how often parts would be needed and where. And some downstream models were having issues, and we couldn't really nail down what the issues were. And then eventually, through basically walking around from cubicle to cubicle and talking to people, discovered that one of the main logistics managers was taking our output and systematically adjusting the numbers. Like, he was like, well, I know every month I raise this one by 2. Every month I raise, whatever. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then it kind of got into deeper conversations around why and what that meant. And,
but exactly. But until you start speaking to people and start speaking to the users, you're completely in the dark about these little things. So exactly what we're trying to focus on, and I think is the issue of just trying to completely automate everything. Even when I've spoken to people about these feedback loops, one of the first responses are, okay, great, so we can just push this into a retraining pipeline. And my response is no. The point here is so you can understand why the user isn't happy or why the user isn't engaging with the model, not to just completely re-automate everything again.
It's so crazy to me how much people want to do that. They want to take the humans just completely out of the system.
It's very interesting, right? Like the kind of the main thing that I'm hearing from all of this, right, is that fundamentally the one of the biggest factors, right, that guides the adoption of machine learning models or AI models or any model, right, is trust between the data scientists and the end users, trust between everyone in the model, and that, I mean, even trust, right, between the employees and the company at large, right? Does the company have my best interests? Are they trying to automate this so that I can do better work, or are they trying to automate me out of a job? And we can solve some of those things with better communication, with creating these feedback loops, creating better alignment between the various groups, and some of those, it's like, well, this is just kind of a cultural thing based on the culture of your company, or the personalities of leadership, or wherever it is, right? So it's interesting, like, hearing you talk, like, we see problems and we try and go solve it, and try to make these processes, these systems better, and still having to acknowledge that you can't fix everything.
Yeah, exactly. I think ultimately AI and machine learning is, well, it's a fairly new technology in terms of it's just properly being implemented into businesses, or coming into our daily lives more and more. So ultimately, that technology doesn't have a track record, and so people are unfamiliar with it. So they're going to be standoffish and hesitant at first. So I do think as well, one of the best sort of resolutions to this challenge as well is just time. And over time, when people become more confident and more familiar with this type of technology, they will be more open to actually engaging with it and adopting it as well. I was listening to another podcast a while back. I can't remember who it's from, but it was on this sort of topic around trust within machine learning, and the person on the podcast came up with a great points of every time you get in an aeroplane and go and fly somewhere, you don't ask for the pilot to explain exactly how everything's working, even though it could easily, well, hopefully not easily, but it could potentially crash. And so why is it that when we have a machine learning model, the first thing people do is ask exactly how it's working? And it's just because they're not familiar with that technology, and they're not comfortable with the track record, especially when you then have news headlines coming out of AI going terribly wrong and making terrible decisions for society, or massively impacting a business or something.
Yeah, I feel like I've had this, and I've talked about this a few times, but like I had this thing where I wanted to start thinking about our data scientists more as business scientists, because I think what stakeholders or end users want is they want to know that they're partnered with you, and that you actually do understand their business objectives, their system. And even if that person can't necessarily communicate in a way that's always not super hyper technical, I think just knowing that there's the partnership and we're in this together, because I think that's what it has to be. And that includes a conversation around like, hey, if we do this thing, then here's what you can do. And then it's like a really dynamic and interesting conversation. And then I think that's where the trust comes, when there's this mutual respect and interest in, weirdly, and I'm going to say this, and it might be false and bad, but I think that like weirdly, it's more leaning in the business side. Like, I don't think the data scientist needs the person to have that same level of interest in the technical aspects of it, but absolutely need that interest in the impact, which is, I think, where the communication gets really hard to explain. And that's what I think anyway.
I was just gonna say, right, this isn't really, I mean, it's new in that we're seeing this in a different light now, but this isn't really a new problem, right? Like, we've had this discussion in the broader mathematical statistical community, right, about the difference between statistical significance and practical significance, right? Like, and one of the things that we see, right, with machine learning is this overemphasis on accuracy, or like, does this model perform well, and not, and kind of in this, I guess, white room, clean place, separated from the business. And then there's like, well, does it actually have business impact? Do the end users actually use this model? Do they trust it? Do they understand what it's trying to do? And do they know how to take the result and interpret it and put that into practice? So, yeah. I guess that was my little aside there.
Well, yeah, I think that also comes down to, putting adoption and usage aside, just the difficulty around actually measuring ROI from a financial point of view as well on various AI use cases. First of all, it's difficult to understand what the outcome would have been without the model regardless. If you're, say, if you're even doing a product recommendation model or something on a e-commerce website, and who's to say that your sales wouldn't have gone up anyway without the machine learning model and the product recommendations? So understanding what the alternative scenario would have been is incredibly difficult, and then it's also then just difficult to then correlate that back to value as well. So I think that's another major challenge which a lot of people are still trying to figure out. Keen to understand how you guys are tackling that.
Oh man, we try. It's a hard one because I mean, especially when you get farther out, right? Like in your scenario, product recommendation, the longer that product is or the machine learning model is operative, the harder it gets to understand what would be going on without it. If not impossible, honestly. Unless you're doing some sort of A/B testing and then extrapolating, and I mean that things
you almost
like
have to start modeling the scenario without the model in place.
right, but it's like, how much are you losing by doing that? And it doesn't outweigh the value of knowing how much ROI you have, because that's then your debate. Well, do we lose a little bit of money to know how much ROI we have?
Right.
Maybe for a while.
Yeah. And I would say, like, in the cases where we have good A/B testing, right, then the measurement of success becomes a whole lot easier, and then that supports growth and adoption of the model itself, and that's really helpful. On kind of that other side, right, you do have we'll call it the self-fulfilling prophecy of machine learning models.
Yeah.
Right. Like, especially when you're talking about targeting, like you're targeting an account for growth, right? If I have a model that tells you, hey, target these 10 accounts to grow, well, now because I told you to target those, you're going to spend more time with those accounts. And so they're way more likely to grow than, the other 10 accounts that I haven't. And if I don't have, like A/B testing that's built in there, and if I haven't planned that out, then there's not really a good way to measure that.
Yeah. And then even then, I guess going forward, even once the value's been proven through A/B testing or something like that, then when you roll out machine learning to the whole cohort, then measuring the ongoing value is then another question, I guess.
Yeah, and I can see how it's critical for businesses to be able to do that on some level, because this isn't cheap to do that. And then there's the ongoing value conversation, right? And hopefully, so some of the ways we've thought about it is, and I'd be really interested to hear how you've been evolving this, because I think the relationship here is so paramount to that. So you have initial value that maybe you can measure more easily, and then the longer it's live, we kind of have started dividing it into like technical monitoring and business facing monitoring. So like we've defined certain model characteristics we want to keep an eye on for a particular model for things that are, and as well as like common things like data drift, model drift, accuracy drift, like things like that, distributions of results, things like that. And then on the business side, the intention is to be in an ongoing fashion measuring the expectation. Is it doing what we expect? Is it performing as we expect? But the ongoing financial ROI measurement, sometimes we can do it. It's sort of obvious and easy. Like I will say that can happen.
Yeah.
But probably more times it's like the error bars just grow. But I do think there's a way in which the business can help creatively solution ways to do that. I think that's been part of our experience. And curious how, because I imagine the feedback loop that you guys are building out could really support movement towards something that's more concrete. Maybe concrete's the wrong answer, but useful.
Yeah. I think this goes back to maybe the points around the sort of machine learning monitoring from the user's point of view. And I guess in this case, monitoring from the business point of view. And again, understanding if the business person or the user may use that prediction to make the necessary decision that they wanted to internally. I guess depending on how bought in your business teams are, you could then potentially be asking for feedback to understand what their decision would have been without the model or in the first place, to see if there's differences there. To try and evaluate the difference and how that might have impacted the value too. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult area and difficult topic.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, especially when you consider one of the things we think about, because we try to sit in that space of tech and product, and the ongoing monitoring is more, it's like subscription based. And we try to ride that line between, okay, your model is continuously reliable and doing what you want. And then there's this question of, okay, now we need to make this adjustment or this addition because of
Mhm.
something that shifted in the business or because of something you've observed. And then the question is like, oh, well, do we want to put that effort in, right? Or do we want to pay for that? Because then it's like, well, then it's so nuanced to make
Mhm.
that decision, right? Like, is this change going to have the value that you think? And it's a difficult thing to judge and gauge for sure.
Yeah. I think this ties into another point around sort of these feedback loops as well. So we've spoken a lot around the feedback being valuable to increase engagement and actually adoption of the models. That feedback too is of course also very valuable to help you actually improve the model as well, and to be able to sort of almost fine tune or optimize the model based on some of this user feedback. And yeah, being able to identify where the model wasn't accurate or maybe incorrect for certain users, or maybe took longer to generate a prediction than should have been, can help us identify various sort of bugs and actual issues with the models themselves, to go away and improve the performance of the model to ultimately try and improve the ROI and the value there as well. So yeah, goes on both sides. Not always about adoption, can also really help fine tune the model too.
I mean, I think without adoption, you almost can't effectively do. That's
Yeah.
my opinion. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
probably some use cases where that's not true, but because I feel like even in that scenario, it's like you have like, let's say the business can say, well, if we do this, some modifications are an easy yes. Like, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
this will take me a day, this will take me 8 hours, or even like 3 weeks. It's like in
Yeah.
the bounds of, like, it's not even worth trying to calculate, right? And then
Mhm.
there's the ones where it's like, oh, this is a bigger lift and a bigger consideration. And then the business person can say, well, actually, this is going to impact like a third of our population, and
Mm.
do that sort of in collaboration together, right? And it's like, oh, well, that's meaningful
Yeah.
information. And maybe the data scientist would know that already, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if you can gather all of this this feedback and these insights from your users, that are associated with a certain fix. So if you can say, hey, look, I don't know, 5,000 requests would have been better or more accurate or the correct decision if we built this fix, then you can actually associate real value to making that change.
Yeah. Right.
Like you're mentioning, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. But I think in order for any of that to be clear, most of the time, not all the time again, but like, it's a lot easier if you have that dynamic, trusting relationship. And then I think it gets even harder. And I don't know if you have use cases around this or how you would handle that, but because we've ran into a few situations where you have like a stakeholder or a set of stakeholders that are really focused on helping you specifically with developing the models and the use case. But then the users, there's like 400 of them.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, that's really difficult. And I'm curious if you've run into that or if you've thought about that scenario or.
Yes. So we work with, obviously, lots of enterprises where they're doing internal business cases. We also work with quite a few smaller sort of AI-based SMEs or scale-ups where obviously AI and machine learning is a core part of their business, but the usage is external. So they have external customers that are actually using the models that we want to get the feedback on as well. And yeah, being able to get the feedback at a much larger scale, I think first of all, is a lot more valuable because it can help you see the issues from a more general point rather than just from a prediction by prediction level. The issue there, of course, is the feedback can be a lot noisier, and this is one of the key reasons as well why an actual technical reason why you don't want to completely automate this process and just take all this feedback to retrain the model is because the feedback might be incorrect itself. So say if somebody sent back saying, hey, this prediction wasn't right, the prediction may have been correct and that person may have been wrong. So it gets another layer deeper and more complicated, but of course you don't want to then just be retraining your model on this incorrect feedback itself. As well, from like a public point of view, if people know that their feedback is retraining a model, you might also have bad actors as well, which are purposely harmfully trying to harm the model. So essentially being able to collect all this feedback and be able to analyze it from a higher level point of view before deciding the next sort of actions and the next decisions is the real key points. And as mentioned, that's something that we want to be focusing on in the future. Actually then being able to pull out intelligent analytics and insights around the feedback, because of course, when you have 400 users and if they're all submitting daily feedback, that volume is going to get quite large quite quickly. So you're going to have some unhappy product owners or data scientists sifting through a load of comments.
So I guess there's one question that I have within that, right? Like, especially when we're talking about large user bases, like do you have like a splitting mechanism to like be able to have different models go to different sets of users, and so you can get feedback on variations?
So in our tool specifically, we don't handle the A/B testing side.
Okay.
But what we do is we track all of that metadata around each piece of feedback. So we can track the model name or model tag. So then within the platform, you can then break down the feedback by model.
Got it.
So the A/B test will be set up on your infrastructure side, however you've deployed the models, and then we can still track the model version or the dataset version or anything like that that each piece of feedback is associated with, to help you compare those pieces of feedback, break down by things like geography and users as well, to try and understand exactly where the issues lie.
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because in that example you gave where someone gave feedback and maybe they thought something was wrong, but it wasn't, it could also be highlighting a misunderstanding of the model itself, right? And then, so maybe the outcome, and that goes to the point of like having a human in the process, right?
Yeah.
Human could say,
definitely.
And the action is to, and if you have all that metadata, find out who is having similar types of misunderstandings and how can we bridge that gap, I guess.
I think with that as well, there could also be things such as cultural differences as well and different expectations on an output. So taking a generative AI example, have to ring that bell at some point, but say if somebody was asking a large language model to maybe write them an email for applying to a job or something like that, in certain countries or certain cultures, you might want it to be much more formal, much more lengthy than other countries where they might want it a bit more casual, snappier and to the point. So being able to also identify different preferences in different geographies or different demographics of people too, could also really help with some of this refinement of models and user experience.
I have this thing in my head. In my head, it goes from less human interaction needed around the generative AI side, and then increases when you get into predictive analytics and machine learning, and then increases even more when you get into like deeper statistical modeling. I have no idea. Like I literally just thought of that during this conversation, but I imagine having a company surrounded around this kind of gets into what types of projects you're targeting for Trubrics. And I'm not sure if that's something you've thought about already or, but just struck me based on what you were, the examples you've been bringing up. Yeah.
So was your scale less user interaction on the generative side and more user interaction when you're going into, or the other way around?
Not user interaction, level of human, like data science, human input needed for success. Like, so generative AI systems where like maybe you have a large language model and you want to give input saying this output feels wrong, and you say this feels wrong, right? And there is a level of human input that's needed for that. And then if you go to like machine learning predictive models and the users giving feedback, the level of like thought patterns that the data scientists might be needing to apply to it is probably bigger. And then when you get into statistical modeling, I imagine it's even bigger, like the level of human thought and application that needs to go into the feedback system.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. on the flip side as well. So yeah, I agree. I think there's almost more domain knowledge and more insights that need to be pulled out to tie that domain knowledge into the more statistical machine learning models themselves.
Right.
On the flip side, with generative AI, it's so difficult to evaluate how well a generative AI model is performing because you don't have that ground truth, you don't have that correct or incorrect. So it's completely subjective, and it's completely down to the user themselves. So yeah, one great way of actually evaluating the performance of generative AI is by user feedback, because we can then understand, yes, this was useful, or no, I'm not happy with this result, and understanding why. So yeah, it's less detailed at that point, like you were mentioning, but it almost becomes more important because there's no other way of really knowing if it was good or bad.
There's more importance for the feedback, but it's more straightforward what to do with that feedback.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, making it up is like
we'll see, maybe.
Yeah.
There's one last point. Well, maybe not last point, but one point I did want to bring up is that Microsoft did their work trend index survey study came out in beginning of May of 31,000 employees, various tech companies, I believe. I'm not sure if it's only Microsoft employees or not, but one of the big things that came out of that was that 49% of the respondents feared AI taking over, or that like affecting their job, right, making them potentially lose their job. But on the flip side of that, there were like 70% hoped that it would be able to help them manage their workload better. And I mean, some of that we have here, right? Like, automating, making these feedback loops, like that can be some of the most time-consuming parts of like machine learning models or deploying models, right? Where you're like, oh, now I need to schedule a meeting, and I have 400 salespeople that are going to be in this meeting, and they're all going to be trying to give me different feedback, and I have to, turn down the transcript to 0.25 to write everything down, try and implement that, but that's definitely something that has been the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. So based on those numbers, that must mean that there are some people who want AI to make their jobs more predictive, and they're afraid it will take over their job.
Yes.
Based on those numbers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's not.
Maybe
it's
they're
not
okay with that as well.
Which I guess makes sense. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, really appreciate your time today, Joel. It's a topic I'm hugely passionate about. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Trubrics and just this concept in general in the market around how we get better at integrating the human input during the development and monitoring of these models, because I do think it's a really important topic that's emerging. So
yeah, sounds good. Well, yeah, thank you very much for having me on today. It's been great to chat to you all about it. Do a quick shameless plug if anyone does want to check out Trubrics, then feel free to head over to our website. But yeah, apart from that, thank you very much, and looking forward to catching up again soon.
great. Thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
So thanks, guys. Bye bye.